My name is Hannah Clark. I was 32, living with Evan for 3 years, and for the past 18 months, our apartment had been a stage where I performed tirelessly. I worked 50 hours a week, cooked his favorite meals, kept the place immaculate, and organized every detail of his life, all while feeling like I was building a shared future. But that Thursday, the migraine hit like a hammer, a gnawing ache that made fluorescent lights unbearable and the hum of the air conditioner feel like a jackhammer. I left work early, hoping for some quiet relief, maybe a nap on the couch before dinner. The apartment door clicked softly behind me. I didn't want to wake anyone if Evan was resting. That's when I heard it. A voice. His voice. Clear, casual, and utterly unflinching. He was on speakerphone, and through the thin walls of the hallway, every word struck me like a fist. "I'm training her," he said, laughing. "Soon she'll do everything I want, like clockwork. It's all about the system. Reward when she complies, withdraw affection when she doesn't. She's invested, works 50 hours a week, still handles all the chores, makes my coffee every morning exactly how I like it. Pathetic, really, but convenient." I froze. My fingers clutched the edge of the doorframe. 3 years. 3 years of cooking, cleaning, planning, sacrificing, adjusting every corner of my life to his convenience. And I was, what? A project? A lab rat? A muffled voice spoke on the other end. His sister concerned. I couldn't catch everything. "Isn't that extreme?" He laughed softly. "Nah. Once you understand human psychology, people are predictable. She won't leave. Sunk cost fallacy. Easy to manage. Give it a few months and she'll be completely where I want her." I backed away silently, my heart hammering in disbelief. My vision blurred as memories collided. Sunday dinners I slaved over, laundry folded while I was bone-tired, mornings spent making his coffee before my own. All of it, observed, analyzed, exploited. I didn't knock, I didn't speak, I didn't even breathe loudly. I backed out, closed the door, and sat in my car for 20 minutes, letting the revelation sink in. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. 3 years. All of it. Wasted. Then the anger started. Not a blind, raging anger, but a cold, calculating one. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. People like him don't change. They only get better at hiding it. But I could change. I could walk away. Quietly. Methodically. I drove without direction, just letting the city blur past. Red lights reflected on my windshield like a strobe of realization. I thought about the lease, about my bank accounts, about every piece of furniture, every utensil, every book. Almost everything I owned was mine. I could leave. I could reclaim my life. Returning home, I made a decision. I would act normal. I would greet him casually, as if nothing had happened. I would let him see no cracks in the facade while I silently began the work of detachment. "Hey," I said, walking into the apartment as if I had just come in from work. My voice was calm, measured. "Migraine's easing. Thought I'd head home early. Want me to make that pasta tonight? The one with sun-dried tomatoes?" "Sure," he replied, not looking up from the TV. Nothing in his tone hinted at the conversation I had just overheard. He had no idea I knew. I made the pasta. We ate. He recounted a minor drama with a friend. I nodded, responded at appropriate intervals. Inside, I felt detached, empty, but also strangely liberated. Later, lying beside him on the couch, I started planning. The lease ended in 3 months. I had enough saved for a deposit on a new place. Utilities were mostly in my name. Furniture, mine. I could leave, and he wouldn't have any leverage. The first step was observation and subtle withdrawal. The manipulator had no idea the tables had turned. I began to catalog my life. The small, tangible markers of my autonomy, receipts for purchases, bank statements, utility bills, all ready to prove ownership. Every minor injustice he had attempted to enforce could now be countered with quiet precision. The anger had sharpened into something almost clinical. I would dismantle the illusion he had built around me, this carefully curated, ideal partner who always complied. I would leave, and I would do it on my own terms. The betrayal was complete, but now so was my clarity. The next few days felt strange, almost surreal. I walked through the apartment like a ghost, a spectator in my own life. Evan was there, as always, moving around with his easy confidence, expecting the usual compliance. But I had already left him, not physically, not yet, but emotionally. Every smile I offered, every nod, was measured, deliberate, detached. I stopped making his coffee in the mornings. When he asked, I simply said, "Running late." He shrugged, barely noticing. I prepared only my meals, citing a new diet I was trying out. Little things, insignificant on the surface, but each one chipped away at the carefully constructed hierarchy of control he thought he held. Internally, I cataloged his reactions. I watched him pivot, searching for signs, recalibrating his strategy. He was subtle, as always. Small guilt trips, the soft disappointment in his eyes, but none of it reached me. I had built walls around myself faster than he could tear them down. Meanwhile, I began reclaiming pieces of myself that he had quietly isolated. Coffee with old friends I hadn't seen in months. A Tuesday night basketball game I hadn't touched in years. Even an old coworker's art opening. Small, personal victories that reminded me who I was outside of his system. At work, I began to breathe again. Without the constant mental load of managing a manipulator's moods, I could focus, could think clearly. I started making plans for a future that had nothing to do with him. A new apartment, a new bank account, a reorganized life. Every step was calculated, deliberate, a quiet reclamation of autonomy. Evan, of course, noticed. The subtle shift in my tone, the absence of eager compliance. "You've been acting different," he said one evening. His voice was a mixture of curiosity, concern, and something I recognized as calculation. I looked at him evenly. "Just stressed with work," I said. Truthful, but only half the story. The other half, the part where I was preparing to leave, was mine alone. He leaned closer, softening. "I'm here, you know. We can work through this." I forced a small smile, calm and distant. "I'm here too, just tired." He studied me, trying to read cracks in my facade. I didn't give him any. Every attempt at guilt, at manipulation, was met with neutrality. I wasn't cold. I was detached, observant, calculating. At night, lying in bed beside him, I began planning more concretely. I created a mental inventory of everything that was mine: furniture, clothes, electronics. I calculated expenses, mapped bank accounts, even made notes about friends he'd tried to edge out of my life. I was building a roadmap out, quietly, deliberately. The apartment itself became a kind of chessboard. Every object, every document, every financial account was a piece in my strategy. I didn't need to raise my voice, to argue, to confront. I would dismantle the illusion he had built around me one careful move at a time. And while he thought he still had control, I had already started to reclaim it. By the end of the week, I could see it in his subtle expressions, the confusion, the minor panic when I didn't follow his usual routines. But I remained outwardly calm, polite, even affectionate when necessary, only enough to avoid suspicion. It was exhausting in its own way, this act of quiet withdrawal, but every day brought a small, secret satisfaction. Each meal I made for myself, each friend I reconnected with, each step toward independence felt like a tiny rebellion, a reclamation of the life I had been bending and breaking for 3 years to maintain. And beneath it all, the thought was always there. Soon, very soon, I will leave, and I will do it on my own terms. By the second week, my plans had moved from abstract to tangible. The apartment we shared had been my stage for 3 years, but now it was simply a space to observe, calculate, and prepare. I had already opened a new bank account under my name alone, rerouted paychecks, and ensured that my personal finances were untouchable. Each deposit, each statement, was a quiet testament to autonomy. I began looking at apartments, small one-bedrooms, close enough to work, but far enough from him to feel like freedom. The first few viewings were innocuous, casual, almost accidental. I asked questions about natural light, security, amenities. Every detail was noted, every lease clause scrutinized. By the end of the week, I had found one, approved and ready. Meanwhile, my outward behavior remained consistent. I still cooked meals when convenient, still offered small smiles, nodded during his stories, asked questions about his day. To anyone else, nothing had changed. To him, every slight deviation in my routine was a puzzle. "Basketball with Greg tonight?" he asked one evening, eyebrow raised. "Yeah," I said, casual. "It's been too long. Should be fun." He paused, calculating. I knew he was assessing whether this was a new manipulation attempt or something else entirely. I let him wonder. He didn't know. At work, I had begun to breathe again. Without the constant mental load of being managed, I was sharper, more present, more myself. My friends noticed subtle changes. I laughed more easily, joked more freely. I realized that Evan had been isolating me, slowly, almost invisibly, and now that isolation was unraveling. Packing became a quiet ritual of reclamation. I started with the items that were unmistakably mine: books, clothing, personal electronics. I left shared furniture untouched, not out of generosity, but to avoid unnecessary confrontation. Every box, every label was a deliberate step toward independence. Evan, as expected, began noticing the changes, the subtle disappearances, the quiet absence of routine. "You've been acting weird," he said one night, the edge in his voice sharpened. I looked at him evenly. "Just stressed. Long week." It was true enough, but not the full truth. The other truth, the part where I was quietly reclaiming every corner of my life, was mine alone. I also started reconnecting with old friends he had quietly edged out of my life. Coffee with Dana, who had always been steady, reliable, and free of calculation. Even small victories like Tuesday night basketball were deliberate reminders to myself. I am reclaiming my life, one choice at a time. And beneath it all, there was a thrill I hadn't expected. It wasn't vengeance. It was control. The manipulator thinks he is always 3 steps ahead, but in reality, the board was mine now. Every move, every small rebellion was calculated. Every step forward in my life was a quiet strike against the illusion Evan had constructed. Even his sister, who had been his quiet collaborator, was unaware of my plan. He thought he had insight. He thought he had the upper hand. I smiled privately at the irony. By the end of the 3rd week, the first move was complete. New apartment ready. Personal finances fully independent. Friendships and hobbies revived. Evan's gaze occasionally betraying confusion, frustration, but nothing more. And the most important part? I had trained myself to see clearly. No longer blinded by love, guilt, or loyalty, I could move forward with a clarity that was almost exhilarating. The controlled exit I had envisioned was no longer hypothetical. It was imminent. I lay awake at night, listening to the quiet apartment, thinking about the first night in my new place. My belongings boxed, my mind unburdened, the thrill of autonomy already coursing through me. The world was mine to navigate, and Evan's system could not touch me anymore. Everything was in motion, every detail accounted for, every contingency considered. The first move had been made, and it had gone perfectly. The morning of the planned move felt almost ordinary. I woke before Evan, the sunlight spilling softly across our apartment. Every object around me, the mugs, the books, the framed photos, had been carefully assessed in the past weeks. Each item either stayed, remained neutral, or was ready to be taken. I dressed quietly, packed a small bag of essentials for immediate use, and poured a cup of coffee for myself. No one else's ritual controlled this morning. By the time Evan stirred, I had already completed half the packing. His movements were casual, unaware, until he finally noticed me stacking boxes in the bedroom. "Hannah Clark, what are you doing?" His voice was calm, almost incredulous, but there was an edge beneath it, a slight panic that he didn't yet admit. I looked up calm and deliberate. "Packing. I'm moving out." His face went through a cascade of expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger, panic, and then, almost immediately, calculated calm. "Wait, what? We live here. We share this apartment. You can't just—" "I can. I am. The lease is up. Everything I'm taking is mine. The rest stays." His eyes narrowed. He tried the soft voice, the one that had once manipulated me into guilt and compliance. "Hannah Clark, we can talk. We can fix this. I'll change. We can—" I didn't flinch. I had rehearsed this hundreds of times in my mind. I let him speak, let him reveal his desperation and disbelief, then interrupted with calm finality. "There's nothing to fix. 3 years of manipulation don't get undone with promises now." Tears sprang to his eyes, but I could see the calculation lingering beneath them. He was trying to rewrite reality, to convince me that our shared history was a partnership instead of a project he had carefully engineered. I moved methodically, calmly loading boxes into my car, labeling everything meticulously. He hovered, alternately pleading, accusing, and crying. I responded with minimal words, polite but detached. Every exchange was a reminder of the clarity I had gained over the past weeks. By the time my friend Greg arrived with his truck around 7 p.m., the apartment was half packed, my boxes ready for transport. Evan attempted one last desperate intervention, grabbed a box, tried to argue ownership, but I had receipts, purchase dates, and records on my phone ready. Evidence was indisputable. He backed off, his anger mingled with shock. By 10 p.m., almost everything I owned was gone. I left behind shared furniture, knowing that its absence or presence was irrelevant to me now. The apartment had been a stage, a manipulation lab, and now it was neutral territory. As I closed the door behind the last box, Evan's voice cracked in a final plea. "Hannah Clark, please, let's try counseling. We can work on this." I turned to him, calm and resolute. "There's nothing to work on. You trained me. That was never a relationship. That was a system you designed to control me. Good luck with your next project." I left. Greg and I drove to my new apartment, boxes stacked in the back. The first night in my own space was surreal. A rented air mattress, unpacked boxes, the quiet hum of a refrigerator. No one evaluating my every move. No one controlling my time. Just me. Finally me. Messages flooded in. Evan, his sister, even his parents. They alternated between anger, pleading, and attempts at manipulation. I responded only once. "We are done. Do not contact me again." Then blocked them. The clarity that had fueled me for weeks became a steady anchor. I could see the extent of the manipulation, the exhaustion it had cost me, and the liberation in reclaiming autonomy. I began reconnecting with old friends fully. Even casual interactions, like a coffee with Dana, reminded me of who I was when I wasn't being managed. There was no obligation, no hidden agenda, no subtle test of loyalty or obedience. Just life, ordinary and unmanipulated. And as I moved further into independence, I realized that the manipulative control Evan had exercised, the training he had boasted about to his sister, was irrelevant. It could not touch me anymore. The first move had been withdrawal, the second, observation, the third, preparation, and now, execution. I had left, yes, but more than that, I had reclaimed the part of myself I had lent away unconsciously. And in doing so, I had demonstrated that the tables could be turned without a scene, without violence, without humiliation, just intelligence, patience, and self-respect. The first confrontation, the controlled exit, was over. The manipulator could rage, plead, or accuse. None of it mattered. My life was mine, my decisions unassailable, and my independence fully realized. The first few weeks in my new apartment were a revelation. The boxes I had meticulously packed were unpacked slowly, deliberately. Each item I placed, books, clothes, kitchenware, was a small assertion of ownership, a reminder that this space belonged to me, and only me. For the first time in years, I moved through a home that was mine in every sense, my schedule, my choices, my rules. The silence was startling at first. No demands, no manipulative undertones, no surveillance disguised as concern. I slept longer, ate when I wanted, and cooked only for myself or friends. The freedom was intoxicating, almost dizzying. I discovered the pleasure of ordinary life, simple tasks without expectation, meals without judgment, evenings without calculation. Evan tried to reassert himself in small ways. Messages, calls, social media posts. I responded only once, calmly, clearly. "Do not contact me again. This chapter is over." Blocked, muted. Every attempt at manipulation fell flat. The system he had relied on, the training he had boasted about to his sister, no longer existed. I had removed myself entirely from its reach. Friends I hadn't seen in months returned, drawn to the steadiness I now radiated. Coffee with Dana became a highlight, a reminder that relationships could exist without strategy or manipulation, built instead on mutual respect and enjoyment. Even casual evenings of basketball, old hobbies, and long walks became forms of therapy, reaffirming my identity outside of Evan's shadow. And slowly the emotional weight began to lift. Every memory of being measured, tested, and trained shifted from personal failure to clarity. This was never my fault. It had been Evan's manipulation all along. My sacrifices, my loyalty, my love, they had been treated as experiments. Recognizing that freed me. By the third month, life had normalized. I was cooking for myself again, reading for pleasure, laughing with friends. I had stability at work, focus in my career, and peace in my personal space. The manipulation that once dictated my every decision no longer existed. I could make mistakes, relax, and exist authentically. Occasionally, I heard updates through mutual friends about Evan. He had moved on quickly, already attempting to replicate the system he had built with me, teaching the same lessons, repeating the same manipulations. I didn't feel satisfaction or vindication. I felt relief. I was no longer a participant in his experiments. I began noticing subtle truths I had overlooked. The friendships he had quietly undermined, the independence he had tried to suppress, the self-respect he had tested. Reclaiming these had been gradual but profound. Every choice I made, small or large, was a step toward full autonomy. One evening, Dana and I cooked dinner together in my kitchen. No expectations, no silent tests, no calculated rewards. She laughed at my burnt lasagna, and I laughed back. The freedom was tangible. I could see myself not as someone who had been managed, controlled, or optimized, but as someone whole, capable, and real. And the final lesson crystallized. The training he thought he had imposed had backfired. Where he had sought compliance, he had instead cultivated awareness. Where he had aimed to control, he had inadvertently prepared me to leave with precision, patience, and dignity. My exit had been methodical, yes, but it had been mine in every sense, executed with intelligence, clarity, and self-respect. The apartment was small but mine. The furniture, the books, the life within it, mine. Every day reinforced that the life I had once ceded to manipulation was now fully reclaimed. I was no longer performing for anyone, no longer calculating every step to appease another person. I existed freely. By the fourth month, the narrative had closed. Evan could rage, plead, or attempt any manipulation, but it held no power. His system had failed because I was no longer a participant. I had reclaimed my life not through confrontation or spectacle, but through observation, planning, and deliberate action. The lesson I carried forward was simple, yet profound. When someone treats you as a project instead of a partner, the only path to freedom is methodical detachment, quiet reclamation, and uncompromising self-respect. You can leave, not violently, not impulsively, but deliberately. And in doing so, you regain everything that was yours: autonomy, dignity, and peace. Hannah Clark had emerged not broken, but stronger, wiser, and entirely her own. The apartment, the routines, the friendships, the quiet evenings of freedom, they were the ultimate proof. Life could continue, unmanipulated, untethered, and real.